Daniel was a soldier who had traveled across many stars, but the world he now lived on felt more foreign than any he had seen before. The planet was called Velara, a place of silver skies and crystal forests that seemed to hum with life. The people who lived here were tall, graceful, and carried themselves with an air of pride that made most humans feel small in their presence. They were known as the Valerians, and among them was their princess, Leora. Princess Leora was not just royalty in name. She was a figure of legend, a leader who had stood beside her people during wars, guiding them with her wisdom and commanding them with her strength. Her beauty was spoken of in every corner of the alliance halls, eyes like shining amber, hair that fell like threads of gold, and a presence that drew both fear and admiration. She was the jewel of her people. Yet to Daniel she was something else entirely. She was a reminder of why he chose to remain apart. Every time the humans and the Valerians gathered for council, Daniel would stand at the edge of the room. He was not a leader, not a commander anymore, but a guard assigned to protect human diplomats. His place was among the shadows, silent and watchful. Yet, he could not escape the princess's notice. At first, Leora thought little of him. Humans had always been curious beings in her eyes, reckless, brave, sometimes foolish, but endlessly resilient. But Daniel was different. He did not seek her attention, as so many others did. He did not try to impress her with bold words or eager service. He simply stood, tall and steady, his gaze never lingering on her more than necessary. That quiet distance drew her curiosity like a flame draws a moth. Days turned into weeks, and the princess began to notice a pattern. At public ceremonies, he would stand near the walls, never stepping into the light where courtiers and nobles tried to outshine one another. At the great banquets, while others feasted and boasted, he sat silently, eating little, speaking even less. And during military drills where soldiers from both species trained together, he fought with precision, not with the wild pride that others displayed. He fought to win, yes, but never to show off. The whispers started among the alien court. Why does the human soldier avoid the princess? Some asked. Does he not know that even the smallest smile from her could raise his standing? Others mocked. To them, Daniel's silence was strange, even offensive, but to Leora, it was a puzzle. One evening, after a council meeting had ended, the princess lingered at the high steps of the great hall. The human diplomats bowed and left. The Valerian nobles drifted into their clusters. Yet Daniel remained by the pillars, waiting until all had gone. She found her gaze caught on him, and for the first time she wondered, was it pride that kept him away or something else entirely? The next day she decided to test him. During a celebration of the treaty between their peoples, she deliberately placed herself in his path. As dancers spun and music filled the air, she walked directly toward him, her golden dress catching the glow of the crystal lamps. Any other man would have bowed deeply, stammered words of praise, or at the very least shown surprise. Daniel only inclined his head slightly and stepped aside, allowing her to pass as if she were no different from anyone else. It was not disrespect. No, she could sense that. It was something else. It was distance. Princess Leora's interest grew sharper. She began to watch him as closely as he had once watched the halls. During training grounds, she saw how he corrected younger soldiers without cruelty, showing them techniques in simple gestures. In the gardens, she once caught him standing still, staring at the alien sky as though searching for something lost, beyond the stars. And in the War Council chamber, when voices rose and tempers flared, he remained calm, his silence heavier than the loudest shouts. The more she noticed, the more unsettled she became. He was not like the others. Even the other humans sought her attention. They brought her gifts, asked for her counsel, and spoke to her with practiced respect. Daniel alone acted as though she were simply another person in the room, no more, no less. For a princess who had grown up surrounded by admiration, such indifference was not easy to ignore. One night, as the moons of Velara shone across the crystal forests, Leora walked with her closest guard. She spoke softly, though her tone carried an edge. "Tell me," she asked, "what do you see in the human soldier who lingers in the shadows?" The guard hesitated. "He is disciplined, my princess. But he avoids the court. Perhaps he fears what he cannot understand." Leora frowned at that. She knew fear when she saw it. Daniel's eyes did not hold fear. They held something heavier, something he tried to bury deep inside. She decided then that she would not rest until she understood him. The opportunity came sooner than expected. During a patrol along the borders of the treaty lands, a small conflict broke out with raiders who still opposed peace. Daniel fought alongside the alien guards, his movements swift and precise. When the raiders were driven back, Leora noticed him tending to the wounded, not just his human comrades, but Veilarian soldiers as well. He spoke little, only doing what was needed. Afterward, as the campfires burned and the wounded rested, Leora approached him at last. Her golden eyes studied him with quiet intensity. "You fight with strength," she said, her voice low but steady. "Yet you carry yourself as though you wish to be unseen. Why is that, human soldier?" Daniel looked at her briefly, then back to the fire. He gave no reply. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Most men would have rushed to fill it, desperate not to offend her. But Daniel let the silence stand as though he carried no need to explain himself. Finally he rose, gave her a respectful nod, and walked away without a word. Leora's heart stirred with something she had not felt in years. Not anger, not insult, curiosity, sharp and deep. She was the princess of Veilara, heir to the throne, voice of her people. Yet this one human chose distance instead of devotion. She could command armies, bend nobles to her will, and yet she could not draw even a single word from his lips. That night, as she stood upon her balcony, the alien skies, alive with silver constellations, Leora whispered to herself, "Why does he stay away?" And in that question her journey began. The days after the border skirmish carried a different rhythm for Princess Leora. Her mind, once consumed with politics, traditions, and the constant balancing of her people's expectations, was now unsettled by a single question. Why did the EI, human soldier, avoid her? Every time she saw Daniel, his presence pulled at her attention no matter how much she tried to focus on her duties. In the council chamber, she found herself stealing glances at him while nobles argued over trade routes. In the garden, she noticed his figure moving in silence along the paths where other guards laughed and traded stories. Even during festivals, where her people filled the air with song and light, she caught him in the distance, standing apart, as though untouched by joy. At first she thought it pride. Then she thought it sorrow. But the longer she watched, the more she realized she could not place him in any simple category. Daniel was not like the other humans who walked eagerly into her halls, hoping to win her trust, or at least her notice. He was steady, polite, but unyielding in his distance. Her curiosity grew sharper each day. One morning during the ritual training between human and Veilarian soldiers, she saw another chance to test him. The training ground was filled with the sound of metal striking against metal and the echo of commands. Soldiers paired up, practicing drills under the bright silver sky. Princess Leora herself often attended these sessions, for she believed a leader must know the strength of her people. She walked among the lines, her golden dress flowing, her crown catching the light. The Veilarian soldiers bowed as she passed, while human recruits stiffened in nervous respect. Yet when she approached Daniel's group, she saw him teaching quietly, showing a younger soldier how to adjust his stance. When he noticed her, he gave a formal nod but said nothing more. "Show me," Leora said suddenly, her voice carrying across the field. The training ground grew silent. Everyone knew the princess rarely stepped into the ring with ordinary soldiers, but she had chosen Daniel, and no one dared question her. Daniel looked at her calmly. "Princess," he said in a level tone, "it would not be proper for me to cross blades with you." "Then you fear me?" she asked, her amber eyes shining with a challenge. A murmur rose among the soldiers. To refuse the princess's request was bold. To accept it meant risking dishonor if he defeated her, or humiliation if he lost. Daniel paused for a long moment. Finally, he lifted his practice blade. "As you wish, Your Highness." The ring cleared. Leora stepped in with graceful precision, her movements sharp as she raised her blade. Daniel stood across from her, his posture relaxed but focused. When the signal was given, she moved first, striking with speed that would overwhelm most opponents. Yet Daniel blocked her strike with simple ease, his counter gentle rather than aggressive. They exchanged blows, hers quick and fierce, his measured and controlled. Every time she tried to push harder, he gave ground without falling, as though his goal was not victory but balance. At last, she pressed forward with a strong strike, and his blade turned aside hers, with a twist that sent it flying harmlessly. From her hands, the soldiers gasped. Daniel, however, did not press his advantage. He lowered his weapon immediately and stepped back, bowing slightly. "You fight with honor," he said, "and with skill greater than most I have seen." There was no arrogance in his tone, only respect. Leora retrieved her blade, her chest rising with breath, her pride stirred not by defeat, but by the restraint he had shown. He had disarmed her without disgrace, and his words carried no mockery. For the first time she saw a glimpse of his strength, not the kind born of ambition but of discipline. That night her thoughts circled endlessly. He had fought her without fear, treated her without flattery, and spoken with honesty free of hidden motives. He was a puzzle she could not ignore. The following day, she arranged for him to join her escort on a tour of the crystal forests. The official reason was to ensure the humans understood the sacred lands. The truth was simpler. She wanted him near. As they walked among trees that shimmered with soft light, the princess asked questions, her tone casual but her intent sharp. "Tell me, soldier," she began. "What do you see when you look at these forests?" Daniel glanced at the glowing trees before answering. "I see beauty," he said quietly, "but also fragility. Something worth protecting, even if it can't protect itself." Leora tilted her head. His answer was not the kind she expected. Most would have praised the forests as divine, or compared them to her own radiance, but his words held sincerity. She pressed further. "And what of our people? What do you think of the Valyrians?" Daniel's step slowed. "I think your people are strong," he said at last. "Stronger than most realize. But strength can sometimes blind." The princess's amber eyes narrowed slightly. "And humans, what blinds them?" A faint shadow crossed his face. "Hope," he said simply. For a moment she walked in silence, trying to decipher him. His answers revealed glimpses of his mind, but never the whole truth. Each word seemed carefully chosen, as though protecting something deeper. By the end of the tour, her curiosity had sharpened into determination. She would uncover what lay behind his distance, no matter how many questions it took. That evening, in the halls of her palace, nobles gathered for another feast. Music filled the air and laughter echoed under the vaulted ceilings. Yet even here Daniel remained apart, standing near the edge of the grand hall as though the splendor of it all belonged to someone else. Leora watched him from her throne, her golden eyes fixed on the soldier who refused to be dazzled. Finally, unable to bear the questions in her mind, she rose and crossed the hall toward him. The nobles fell silent as she approached, curious to see what she would do. "Human soldier," she said firmly, standing before him. "You keep your distance from me at every turn. You avoid my gaze, my words, my presence. Do you dislike me?" The hall hushed, waiting for his reply. Daniel looked at her calmly. "No, princess, I do not dislike you." "Then why?" she pressed, her voice low, carrying more than curiosity. There was demand in her tone, the command of one used to answers. For the first time she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not fear, not pride, but sorrow. His gaze dropped briefly. then lifted. Again steady as ever. "I have my reasons," he said simply, and with that he bowed and stepped aside, as though the conversation had ended. The nobles whispered furiously. Some were outraged at his audacity, others amused by his restraint. But for Leora, his answer was like a spark thrown onto dry wood. She burned with curiosity now more than ever before. That night, as she stood on her balcony with the alien stars above her, the memory of his quiet words echoed in her thoughts. "I have my reasons." What reasons? What pain did he carry that made him choose silence over closeness? She vowed that she would find out no matter how long it took. For Princess Leora, the game had changed. This was no longer about curiosity. It was about uncovering the truth hidden behind the human soldiers. Steady eyes and distant silence. The more Princess Leora tried to understand Daniel, the more her thoughts circled him like restless wings in the night. His silence was not the kind that came from arrogance or rudeness. It was deeper, heavier, as if it was carrying the weight of something unspoken. She was a princess who had grown up surrounded by voices, praise, and constant attention. Silence had always been rare in her world. But with Daniel, silence was his shield, and she wanted to know what it was hiding. She began to seek him out more, often though she disguised it as duty. When the human diplomats walked the palace halls, she arranged her schedule to cross their path. When soldiers from both species trained together, she made sure to be present, her eyes lingering on him, more than anyone else. She even found herself asking her closest advisors about him. Most had little to say beyond that he was disciplined, skilled, and kept mostly to himself. One evening, while the palace buzzed with the usual noise of feasts and political games, Leora slipped away from the banquet and wandered into the quieter courtyards. She found Daniel there, alone, sitting on the steps beneath the glow of the crystal lanterns. His gaze was fixed upward at the alien stars, his posture still, his face calm, yet distant. "Always apart," she said softly as she approached. Daniel turned his head slightly, acknowledging her but not moving otherwise. "Princess, you avoid the halls of laughter, you avoid the council, and you avoid me," she said, her amber eyes narrowing. "What are you searching for in the stars that you cannot find here?" For a long moment he did not answer. Then, in a voice low and steady, he said, "I search for the faces that will never return." Her step slowed. The tone in his voice was not sharp, not defensive. It was sorrowful. She sensed she had touched something delicate, something that had been buried deep within him. "You have lost," she said softly. Daniel's eyes did not leave the sky. "Yes, more than I can count, and I do not wish to lose again." Leora lowered herself onto the stone steps beside him. For a moment they sat in silence, the stars above them glittering like distant fires. Then gently she asked, "Was it in war?" His jaw tightened. He finally turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw the weight of years, the heaviness of memory. "It was always in war. On worlds you will never see. Against enemies who no longer exist. My people fought. Beside yours. I commanded men and women who trusted me, and I watched them fall." Leora's breath caught. She had known humans as fierce fighters, reckless but loyal. Yet she had never thought deeply about the scars they carried after battle. "I was a commander. Once," Daniel continued. "But my command cost lives. Good lives. When peace was signed, I stepped back. I chose the shadows instead of the light, because the light reminds me of what I lost." His words sank into her heart like heavy stones. For the first time she began to understand his distance. It was not born of dislike, it was born of grief. He avoided her not because he did not care, but because she represented everything he feared. Attention, closeness, and the possibility of losing again. Leora looked at him, her voice quieter than it had ever been. "You think if you stand near me you will lose again?" Daniel held her gaze. Yes, or worse, I will want something I cannot have. And when it is taken, it will break me again. The princess fell silent. She was used to people reaching for her, desiring her crown, her favor, her smile. But here was a man who stayed away, not because he saw her as less, but because he feared seeing her as more. That truth shook her more than any flattery ever could. The following days, Leora carried his words with her. She found herself replaying them in her mind during council meetings, during ceremonies, even when she was supposed to be focusing on state matters. The memory of his quiet voice, heavy with pain, lingered like a shadow across her thoughts. At the same time, she began to notice how others treated him. Some of her nobles mocked his silence, calling it weakness. Others dismissed him as a soldier, unworthy of notice. Yet those same voices had never seen what she saw: his quiet strength, his unshakable discipline, the way he carried his burdens without letting them crush him. One afternoon, during a diplomatic session, tempers flared between human and Valyrian representatives. Voices rose, accusations flew, and the chamber trembled with anger. Leora, seated at the high dais, scanned the hall and found Daniel standing at his usual place near the pillars. He was calm, watching without speaking, his expression steady even as chaos brewed. And when a fight nearly broke out between two younger guards, Daniel stepped forward, placed a firm hand on each, and ended it with nothing more than his presence. That was when she realized his silence was not weakness. It was strength, carved from pain and loss, but strength nonetheless. Later that evening, as the sun set over the crystal forests, Leora found herself speaking to her closest advisor. "Why do humans hide their pain so carefully?" she asked. The advisor shook his head. "Perhaps because their lives are shorter. They carry their memories quickly, and to survive, they must bury what they cannot carry in the open." Those words stayed with her. She began to see Daniel not as someone avoiding her, but as someone protecting himself from the weight of his own past. And yet the more she understood, the more she wished he would trust her enough to share it. One night she sought him out again. This time she found him near the training fields, sharpening his blade alone. The moonlight glinted off the steel as he worked in silence. "Human soldier," she said, her tone more gentle than before, "you once led men and lost them, but you still fight. Why?" Daniel paused, setting the blade aside. "Because even if I lost before, others still need protecting. Even if I fail again, I cannot stand by and do nothing." Leora studied him closely. His answer was not for her approval. It was his truth. And in that truth, she saw the measure of his character. She stepped closer. "You think distance will protect you from pain, but distance will also keep you from everything worth living for." For a brief moment, Daniel's eyes flickered with something, uncertainty, perhaps even longing. But then he looked away. "Maybe. But I would rather live in silence than risk another grave filled because I stood too close." Her heart ached at his words. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that not every bond ended in loss. But she held her tongue. She knew that forcing him would only push him further away. Instead, she made a silent vow to herself. She would not stop until she broke through the walls he had built. Not out of pride, not out of curiosity anymore, but because she saw the man behind the silence. And she could not turn away. That night, as she returned to her chambers, she whispered to herself, "His silence hides his burden, but it will not silence me." And with that, Princess Leora prepared herself for the challenge ahead, not of commanding armies or ruling her people, but of reaching the heart of a single human soldier who had lost too much to risk being close again. The palace had grown quieter in the weeks since Daniel's quiet confession. Princess Leora carried his words like a secret flame, hidden but burning. She could not look at him without remembering the sorrow in his voice when he spoke of the faces that would never return. He had lost more than she could ever imagine, and yet he stood tall, steady as stone, carrying his burden without asking for pity. Her respect for him had grown into something deeper, though she could not yet name it. And still, one question lingered in her heart, gnawing at her every time she saw him standing apart. "Why do you stay away from me?" she had asked once before, and he had given her no answer beyond silence and vague words. But the truth she sought was not the kind to be taken. It had to be given. And so, she waited. The chance came on a night when the silver moons of Velara hung low over the horizon, bathing the crystal forests in pale light. The air was cool, carrying the soft hum of the living trees. Princess Leora had dismissed her attendants, choosing solitude for her walk beneath the stars. But solitude was not what she truly wanted. She wanted the human soldier who haunted her thoughts. She found him near the edge of the training grounds, alone as always, watching the horizon where distant storms rolled. His figure was tall and steady, his armor plain compared to the ornate uniforms of the alien guard. Yet to her, he seemed more striking than all of them. "Human soldier," she said softly, stepping closer. Daniel turned, his face calm but guarded. "Princess." For a moment they stood in silence, the only sound the whisper of wind through the crystal branches. Leora's amber eyes studied him with quiet intensity. She was not here as a ruler tonight, not as a princess commanding answers, but as a woman who wanted the truth. "You once told me you carry faces you cannot forget," she said. "You told me silence is your shield. But there is one thing I still do not understand. Why do you stay away from me?" Daniel's gaze held hers, steady but unreadable. "Because it is safer," he said at last. Her heart tightened at the simplicity of his words. "Safer? For whom?" "For you. For me. For everyone," he answered. Leora stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "I am not afraid of danger. I have walked into battles myself. I have stood before enemies who wished for my death. Do you think distance will protect me?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not from death. From me." Her breath caught. She had expected excuses, perhaps even more silence, but not this. "From you? Why would I need protecting from you?" His eyes, usually so calm, now carried a storm. "Because if I let myself stand near you, if I let myself see you not as a princess but as someone I value, then I will want something I cannot have. And when that is taken from me, as it always is, I will break again. I cannot bear to lose more, princess. And standing close to you feels like walking into that loss before it even happens." The words struck her like a blade, not with pain, but with truth. He was not avoiding her out of disdain. He was avoiding her because he feared what she represented, hope. And hope was the one thing he had trained himself not to touch. For the first time in her life, Princess Leora was silenced. She who had commanded armies with her voice, who had silenced courts with a single look, now found herself unable to speak. The silence stretched between them, heavy yet alive. Finally, Daniel turned his gaze to the horizon again, his voice softer than before. "I stayed away because I did not want to see you as a prize," he said. "I have lost too much chasing what others told me to value. If I stood near you, princess, I feared I would forget why I survived." Leora felt her chest tighten, her breath shallow. No one had ever spoken to her like this. All her life, people had seen her as a crown, a symbol, a path to power. Daniel alone saw her as a danger, not because of who she was, but because of what she could awaken in him. His words carried no flattery, no pretense. They were raw, unshaped, and painfully honest. "You fear me not for what I might do," she whispered, "but for what you might feel." Daniel did not answer, but his silence spoke more than words. The princess looked away, her thoughts racing. She had spent her life surrounded by voices that wanted to use her, flatter her, or shape her, and yet the only voice that mattered now was the one that refused her completely. His honesty was not meant to wound her, but it cut deeper than lies ever could. For a long while they stood under the silver moons, two figures caught between distance and closeness. Finally, Leora lifted her chin, her expression steady though. Her heart trembled. "You think silence will save you," she said quietly. "But silence has already taken enough from you. Do not let it take more." Daniel's gaze flicked to her, his eyes searching hers as though trying to measure the truth in her words. But then he stepped back, bowing his head slightly. "Princess," he said simply. And with that he turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone under the stars. Yet though he walked away, his words remained, echoing inside her like a bell that would not stop ringing. "I stayed away because I did not want to see you as a prize. I feared I would forget why I survived." For the first time in her life, Princess Leora felt truly silenced. But she also felt something else, something stronger than silence. Determination. That night as she stood upon her balcony, the alien winds carrying the scent of the forests below, she whispered to herself, "If he fears closeness, then I will show him closeness is not always loss. If he fears silence, then I will give him words, worth keeping." Her decision was made. She would not allow his burden to keep him in shadows forever. If it took every part of her will, she would prove to him that distance was not the only way to survive. And though she did not yet know it, Daniel's reply had already changed her. The princess who had once been content with admiration now longed for truth, and she had found it in the one man who stayed away. The palace of Velara had always been a place of noise, courtiers whispering, nobles boasting, guards marching, and musicians filling the air with their endless songs. Princess Leora had grown up surrounded by that sound, so much so that she once thought silence was emptiness. But after hearing Daniel's words, she began to see silence in a different light. It was not empty. It was heavy, full of things unsaid, carrying truths that few dared to speak. And it was that silence that bound her thoughts to the human soldier more tightly than any crown or throne ever could. Daniel returned to his duties, as if nothing had changed. He stood guard at the edges of councils, trained soldiers with calm precision, and kept his place in the shadows. But for Leora, everything felt different now. Every time she looked at him, she remembered his reply. The raw honesty in his voice had shaken her more than any weapon ever could. He had silenced her not with force, but with truth, and truth was something she could not ignore. In the weeks that followed, she no longer tried to trick him into conversation. She no longer demanded answers in front of others. Instead, she began to walk beside him quietly. Sometimes it was in the gardens where the crystal trees glowed with soft light. Sometimes it was on the palace walls, where the alien winds carried scents from the forests. And sometimes it was in the halls after long councils, where only their footsteps echoed. They spoke little, but when they did, it was never about politics or titles. She asked about his people, and he told her simple stories of earth, of rivers that ran wild, of mountains that scraped the sky, of storms that roared with power. He spoke of things she had never seen, things that reminded her the galaxy was larger than her own world, and in return, she told him of her people's traditions, of songs sung beneath silver moons, and of the burden of a crown that weighed heavier than armor. It was not the kind of closeness born from ambition or desire. It was quiet, steady, and real. The court, however, noticed. Whispers spread quickly through the halls. "The princess walks with the human soldier," they said. "She listens to him as if his words carry more weight than a noble's." Some were scandalized, others amused, and a few even jealous, but Leora paid no mind to them. For the first time, she felt she had found someone who saw her not as a princess, but simply as herself. One evening, during a ceremony honoring the peace treaty, the nobles gathered in their finest attire. Music swelled, and dancers spun beneath crystal lights. Leora sat on her throne, her crown gleaming, her expression calm. But when her gaze drifted across the hall, it was not the jeweled nobles she sought. It was the soldier standing near the wall, plain in his armor, silent as ever. Their eyes met across the distance. He gave the smallest nod, nothing more. And yet to her it felt like more than all the bows she had received that night. Later, when the celebration ended and the halls emptied, She found him outside near the steps leading down to the gardens. The air was cool, the moons casting pale light over the paths. "You did not join the feast," she said, stepping beside him. "I had no place there," Daniel answered simply. "You are wrong," Leora replied. "You have more place than many who filled that hall with noise." He gave a faint smile, the first she had seen from him. "And yet, I am here." She looked at him, studying the lines of his face, the calm strength in his posture. "Do you still believe distance will save you?" she asked quietly. Daniel's smile faded, replaced by the familiar shadow in his eyes. "I believe it keeps me standing." "And I believe it keeps you from living," she said firmly. For a moment, he looked at her as though weighing her words. Then, instead of answering, he simply nodded and turned his gaze back to the stars. That was when she realized something important. She could not change him with force, nor with demands. His silence would not be broken by command. But it did not need to be broken. For in silence they had found a bond stronger than words. The days that followed proved it. When raiders threatened the borders again, Daniel fought fiercely, but this time, Leora noticed he glanced toward her often, not in fear but in assurance. When storms swept across the forests and the palace shook under the winds, they stood, together on the walls, saying nothing yet sharing strength. And when the council grew restless with arguments, Leora found peace in knowing that Daniel's steady figure was always there, reminding her that not every voice needed to be loud, to be powerful. Their connection was not spoken of openly. It did not need to be. The court might whisper, the nobles might wonder, but between Leora and Daniel, silence was enough. One night, as the moons cast their silver light over the land, Leora stood on her balcony. Daniel was below in the courtyard, his watch as steady as ever. She called down softly, her voice carried by the night air. "Human soldier," she said. He looked up, his face calm in the pale glow. "Princess, you once said you stayed away because you did not want to see me as a prize," she reminded him. "Tell me now, what do you see when you look at me?" For a long moment he did not answer. Then, with a voice steady and low, he said, "I see someone who is more than a crown, someone I respect." Her heart stirred at his words. They were not grand, not poetic, but they were true. And for her, truth mattered more than any flattery. She smiled faintly, her amber eyes glowing in the moonlight. "Then that is enough." And in that moment they both understood. Their bond did not need grand declarations or promises. It was built on respect, on silence, on truths spoken only when they mattered most. The galaxy around them would always demand noise, wars, councils, politics, and endless voices. But between a princess of Velara and a human soldier named Daniel, silence was not emptiness. It was a bond that would carry them through whatever storms the future held. And though the world might never understand it, Princess Leora knew, the truth in her heart. The reply that once silenced her had given her something greater than words. It had given her someone she could finally trust.